have this little pot here. Now, there's a couple really nice things about it, and there's a couple things that need to have improvement on it. One of the things that's really nice is it has a really nice interior space. That's something that's so important. I know that each one of your bowls can be trimmed. I also know that it's a little thick, and that the next time I can pull a little bit more. And I bet I can say that to many of your pots. And it's just being brave. You know, it truly is. But I also know that this will be a fun little sauce bowl once it's trimmed. And so what we have to do is kind of reintroduce ourselves to what we did. We have to understand how thick something is. We have to understand where the foot is going to go. We have to understand how to take it off, the trimming process, and how to attach it back to the wheel. So first things first. When I take and I feel a pot, I bring my fingers down along here. And right here is where the walls hit the bottom. So I'm just going to take my little fingernail for now and just make a little line right there. Then I also am going to feel, like, make sure it's pretty thick. Some people will pin tool it. Sometimes I do. Most of the time I don't. But I'm gonna feel it. It's pretty thick. It's got about 1/2 inch for sure. So I'm reacquainting myself to what I did on this specific bowl. Now I want to think about, well, where do I want the foot? Well, the truth is I don't want it way out here, because then it would just look like something really heavy. And I also don't want it really tiny in here, because then it would be tippy. I'm looking for the just right. Goldilocks is my friend. So what I'm thinking about is that I want to see where the bowl is curving before it gets to that little middle part and flat. And so I'm looking at it, and right here is where it's curving. So I'm going to put my finger here, and then I'm going to look at it like this, and I'm going to say, oh, right about here is where my finger is. So I'm going to put a line right here. And I realize now that I'm going to start trimming away from this part to this part. That's the clay I need to take away. That's where all that extra clay is. I also know that when I make my foot ring, I'll be taking off the clay in the middle as well. My goal is, and the ultimate goal in trimming, is to make the inside and the outside be the same shape or form. So now I need to recenter it. We trim when the pieces are perfect leather hard. We don't trim when it's wet, and please, we don't trim when it's going dry. Perfect leather hard. Again, going back to why it was so important that we check our pots. So now I'm going to set it down on that rim. That rim is going to support itself, because now I'm pushing down on it. I don't want it to collapse. One of the nice things about these wheels is they have these fabulous little circles there that help you to manipulate or move it into center. And each one of them, no matter how wonky your little pots are, can be centered. And we will look for about a 95% center ratio. If they're not centered, okay, if they look like this, then you're going to trim through it, and you're going to have a really lopsided pot. So we're going to take them, and you know I'm going to help you through it, and I like to just visually center it first. Like, okay, that's fine. Then I'm going to take my bevel tool, my favorite bevel tool, and I'm going to turn it on pretty quickly, so I think about it being fast. And it's a little scary, but as long as you do this, again, holding the tool and getting the wheel going, it'll be fine. So what I need to do is find the point that it's too far over. So it's kind of like an old-fashioned record player. I'm going to drop the needle on. But instead I'm going to use my bevel tool, and I'm going to come to the side. I'm not going to jab it. I'm going to come to the side, and I'm going to lay it into it. Just close enough that it is touching. And I'm going to slowly just drop the wheel. And what I'm looking for is that little tiny mark. Can you guys see that even in the cheap seats? Can you see that little tiny mark? What that means is that when it was rotating, it was over too far on that side. So what I like to do is I find that little line. Okay, this is where I start. I find that little line. And I know now, looking at it, it's too far over this way. It's too close to me. So I need to push it away, just a tiny bit. So I'm going to push it away just a little bit at a time. And I'm going to be really careful. I just worked really hard. So I'm going to put my hand on it and push down, and I'm going to wipe that line away a little bit so I don't get confused with the next line I make. But if I didn't hold my hand there, I would have moved it, and then I'm starting all over again. gonna turn it back on. Whew, doesn't that look better? Doesn't it look like it's rotating all the way around pretty smooth? Don't look at where I'm trimming. Look at the whole pot. So now I'm gonna take my bevel tool and I'm gonna bring it right up to the side. And sure enough, I can visually see that it's going all the way around. And I can see that it's there. At least 95% of the way. I need you to be aware of that. So then I need some clay, fresh clay. Preferably clay that is not gooey and soft. So I like to take it out of the hand building clay and maybe leave it out a little bit. Because I noticed that the hand building clay is a little bit wet. It's actually very throwable up front. So if you use that for throwing, it wouldn't be so bad right now. But I make sure that it is not gooey. And I need a small handful. And I'm going to divide it up into 4 little lugs. L-U-Gs, lugs. And again, I become a little bit particular about how I do this. And it's because I don't want to make a mess on the piece. And I want to make sure it doesn't go flying off. Because once this thing goes spinning, if you don't have it attached, it will go flying off into Miss Lily's lap. Okay? And that's a guarantee. So I'm going to hold on to it. And I need to lug it north, south, east, and west. But I'm going to hold on to it for every single one. So I push down on it, and I take my little lugs. And again, I know that I am very particular, so I always think north, south, east, and west. And that mine look like little shrimps. And then I'm pushing them in, and so it's hugging it around. And why it's doing it this way is because it's holding it in place. It's holding it around the pot, and it's holding it to the wheel head. Okay. So now I need my trimming tool. We've been using this for a variety of things, but that's what this is. These are my favorite trimming tools. And so the round end, as I said way back at the beginning of the semester, is the digging end. And we're going to start with that. The flat end is the detail or smoothing end. When you all start this, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you. I'll hold your hand. I mean, that's fine, right? We're going to figure this out. It's not too much pressure, but you have to hold it tightly. You can't let your hand bounce around. If your hand bounces around, you'll get your pot and it'll look like, we call it chattering, and there's all sorts of funny lines. Everybody thinks, oh, cool, that's a nice texture, and that's, oh, you're a beginner, okay? We're going to say, no, we don't want those chattering lines. We want to hold it nice and still. We want to make sure that it looks just like we drew it. Okay, so now we have to have the wheel going a little fast. The first time you're a little bit worried about it, but once you get a hold of it, this is my absolute most favorite thing to do. It's like the reward for all the mess and all the heartache of learning centering. I'm going to hold it right to the side. I'm going to hold it really tight. And the thing that I'm going to address with you is where you put the tool and the angle in which it comes into the clay. That's the thing that's a little bit tricky. It's not flat across it, and it's not flush. So at the top is where it's thicker, so that's where I can push a little harder. As it comes down on the side, that's where it gets a little thinner. So it's thicker here and thinner. Thicker here, and then as I bring it down, I ease up my pressure now. I already trimmed down there. But here I'm trimming, and here I'm easing up. Here I'm trimming, and here I'm easing up. Here I'm trimming, and here I'm easing up. So what I've done is I walked that line in, and so my foot stands up.
Are you referencing those lines you made in the beginning with your fingernail?
Yes. So here's my line. So that's where I knew I was going to come into. Okay? So I took away all that space in between. I also have to blend it into the body. So here's that line. You see my thumbnail right here? Okay? So that's going to be the outside of my foot. I'm going to walk it in just a tiny bit more so that my foot really stands up. But do you see I just made this funny little dish there? You don't want to leave that there. I'm going to smooth that away. But before I do that, I want to take the inside out. So the inside, we're going to take our tool and put it upright. and we move it to the right. And then we have to think about the foot thickness. And usually, again, absolutely no more than a half an inch, quarter an inch is fine, somewhere in between. For my left-handers, what you want to do is push it down and bring it towards you. And you'll get the same effect. I know that will feel more natural to my left-handers. So the thing is that I have to remember how thick the piece was. In this case, it was pretty thick, so I knew I could trim a little bit more. But once I do that maybe several times, again, depending on the thickness, now I'm ready to smooth it out. So now I'm ready to turn the tool over, and I'm just going to let it shape. This is the part that I find really hard to kind of hold your hand to help you do. And it's because it really is a delicate touch. I don't want to push too hard. And so what I'm doing is just kind of letting the tool ride up and down, just so that it trims away those throwing marks, or excuse me, those trimming marks. And I'll do the same thing on the inside. Sometimes I might leave a little swirl on the inside, but I definitely will clean it up on the inside. Then the last thing I do is I make sure that this bottom area is nice and clean. So I use my flat end of the tool again, and I just hold it here for a moment, make sure it's all nice and level. But now I've made these hard edges here, so I'm going to smooth them up. And what I like to do is just give it a little bevel, or I'll even round it over just a tiny bit. It's a nice thing to look at pots, definitely handmade pots, but it's also really important to see how the potter finishes their work. That's a really important part of it. So before I completely finish, I just check it, make sure that it is completely finished. And I take a look at it. And now I'm going to take my sponge. And I just like to really squeeze out all the water. Speaking of sponges, I've been finding an awful lot of sponges in the water after class. That means we need to be checking our buckets a little better, because that can be very detrimental to the clay production. So if you're missing a sponge, I put them up there. So now what I'm going to do is take a little bit of water, and what I'm doing is just lightly softening this surface, and I'm going to compress the bottom. You can use your finger. Some people use a little wooden tool. I always say just use your finger, because then you can feel it. And I compress, and I just smooth it up. So pretty much this is done. So what has to happen is then we peel these away, and as long as you didn't use really gooey clay, when you go to peel these away, they won't stick. If your pot was too wet to begin with to trim, they will stick. So now we look at that and we think, dang, did I make that? Is that exciting? Right. And so I go through it and I just clean up any of the clay that might have stuck to it. I always check to it. I don't want to wipe it so much that it becomes very gritty, but I do want to just find where maybe my finger mark was in there, and I just try to finish it up really nicely. Now what we don't do is that we really don't trim the walls. Those are the things we need to pull more. This piece, although it's a little bit heavy, when we go to feel it, it's going to feel very even. I'm going to pass it around, and then you've got a pot finish.